Imagine diving into the cold, dark waters of one of America's Great Lakes. Below you, there is no shoreline, no forest, no road, only miles of freshwater stretching into darkness. But now imagine that beneath those waters, hidden from human eyes for thousands of years, there are traces of something unexpected. A place where people once lived, where hunters crossed a landscape that no longer exists, where stone tools were made, where ancient camps may have stood, and where the bottom of the lake is not simply a lakebed, but the drowned remains of an entire prehistoric world. This is not a story about Atlantis. It is something far more real, because during the last ice age, the Great Lakes looked nothing like they do today. Their water levels changed dramatically, their shorelines moved, and enormous areas of land that humans once walked across eventually disappeared beneath rising water. So the question is not whether an ancient landscape exists beneath the Great Lakes. We know it does. The real mystery is this: how much of that lost world is still waiting to be discovered? And could something much larger than a campsite be hidden beneath the water? To understand the mystery, we have to go back thousands of years. Long before the United States existed, long before cities like Chicago, Detroit, Toronto, or Cleveland, North America was coming out of the last ice age. Massive glaciers covered much of the northern continent. The Great Lakes were being shaped by enormous sheets of moving ice. As the climate warmed, those glaciers began to retreat, and the landscape changed with them. Rivers appeared, forests expanded, animals moved into newly exposed territory, and humans followed. These people were not living in permanent cities like we imagine today. They were hunter-gatherers. They moved across the landscape according to seasons, animals, water, and resources. But that does not mean they left no traces. They made stone tools. They built temporary camps. They created hunting structures. They traveled along ancient routes. And some of those places are now underwater. This is where the story becomes fascinating. Today, the Great Lakes contain an enormous amount of freshwater. But their modern appearance is relatively recent in geological terms. Water levels have risen and fallen repeatedly. Some changes were caused by glacial retreat. Others were connected to shifting drainage systems and changes in the landscape. The result was a moving shoreline. And every time the water advanced, part of the ancient world disappeared. But what exactly disappeared? Archaeologists have found evidence that ancient landscapes beneath and around the Great Lakes were once occupied by humans. One of the most famous discoveries came from Lake Huron. In 2007, researchers working in the Alpine-Amberley Ridge area identified a remarkable prehistoric hunting structure beneath the lake. The feature consisted of carefully arranged stones forming a long line across the ancient landscape. Researchers interpreted it as a hunting drive. The basic idea is simple. Hunters could use a stone alignment or natural terrain to guide animals toward a specific location. And in this case, the animals may have been caribou. But there was something extraordinary about the location. The structure was not on the modern shoreline. It was deep beneath Lake Huron. Thousands of years ago, however, the area was dry land. That means the lake had effectively preserved part of an ancient hunting landscape. Think about what that means. The lake was hiding a human-made structure in plain sight. Not beneath layers of jungle. Not buried under a desert, but beneath hundreds of feet of freshwater. And that discovery raised a much bigger question. If ancient hunters built structures like this beneath Lake Huron, what else could be down there? The Alpine-Amberley Ridge is especially important because it was once a broad land corridor. During periods of lower water levels, people could move across areas that are underwater today. The landscape may have included forests, wetlands, rivers, and open areas where animals gathered. Imagine standing there 9,000 years ago. There would be no lake, no waves, no boats. Instead, you might see a vast northern landscape stretching toward the horizon. And somewhere across that landscape, groups of hunters were moving, following animals, searching for food, using stone tools, building temporary structures. Then the climate changed. The glaciers continued to retreat. Water levels shifted, and slowly the landscape disappeared. But the people did not necessarily disappear with it. They moved, they adapted, and their descendants continued living across the Great Lakes region for thousands of years. This brings us to another important part of the story: indigenous traditions. The Great Lakes are home to many indigenous nations, including the Anishinaabe peoples and others whose histories extend deep into the past. Their oral traditions contain accounts of migrations, landscapes, animals, floods, and relationships with the natural world. But we have to be careful here. Oral traditions should not automatically be treated as literal archaeological records. A traditional story is not the same thing as a radiocarbon date, and an archaeological site cannot automatically prove a specific legend. The two forms of knowledge can sometimes provide valuable perspectives on the same landscape, but they must remain distinct. That distinction matters because the mystery of the Great Lakes has attracted many exaggerated claims. Some people have suggested that enormous lost civilizations once occupied the region. Others have connected underwater structures to Atlantis. Still others have claimed that mysterious stone formations prove the existence of an unknown prehistoric culture. There is currently no solid archaeological evidence for a lost advanced civilization beneath the Great Lakes. But that does not make the real discoveries any less fascinating. In fact, the truth may be more interesting, because the underwater evidence points toward ordinary people living extraordinary lives in a landscape that no longer exists. And that lost landscape was enormous. The ancient Great Lakes region was not simply a collection of isolated camps. It was part of a broader human environment. People hunted, they traveled, they gathered plants, they followed waterways, they interacted with neighboring groups, they developed technologies suited to their environment, and they left behind objects that can survive for thousands of years. Stone is especially important. Wood, leather, clothing, food, and other organic materials usually disappear. Stone tools can survive, so can carefully arranged rocks. And that creates a strange archaeological problem. The evidence we find underwater may represent only a tiny fraction of what once existed. Imagine an ancient campsite. Thousands of objects may have been present. Most could eventually decay. Only the stone survives. Now place that campsite beneath a lake. Sediment slowly accumulates. Visibility becomes almost non-existent. Modern sonar may pass over the area without revealing much. Divers cannot easily search huge underwater regions by hand. And suddenly archaeology becomes less like excavation, and more like searching for needles across an underwater continent. That is why underwater archaeology in the Great Lakes is so important. Modern technology has changed what researchers can investigate. Sonar can map the lakebed. Sub-bottom imaging can reveal buried features. Remote sensing can identify unusual patterns. And divers can investigate promising locations. But technology does not eliminate the mystery. It creates new questions. A strange shape on sonar might be a human structure. Or it might be a natural geological formation. A line of stones might have been deliberately arranged. Or it might have been created by glaciers. A depression in the lakebed might be an ancient feature. Or simply erosion. This is one of the biggest challenges in underwater archaeology. The Great Lakes were shaped by powerful natural forces. Glaciers dragged enormous rocks across the landscape. Ice fractured bedrock. Water eroded shorelines. Storms moved sediment. And thousands of years of geological activity can create patterns that look surprisingly artificial. So every potential discovery has to be tested. Researchers need multiple lines of evidence. Context matters. Dating matters. And most importantly, the interpretation has to survive scientific scrutiny. This is where fact and mystery collide. The facts are already extraordinary. Ancient people lived around the Great Lakes. Some ancient landscapes are now underwater. Archaeological structures have been discovered beneath Lake Huron. And changing water levels transformed the region repeatedly after the Ice Age. Those facts are not speculation. But what remains unknown is much larger. How many ancient camps are underwater? How many hunting sites have never been identified? Were there ancient villages in areas that later became submerged? What tools might still be buried beneath sediment? Could organic materials survive in certain underwater environments? And how much of the prehistoric Great Lakes landscape has never been systematically explored? These are real archaeological questions. And there is another reason they matter. Underwater archaeology can preserve landscapes that have disappeared everywhere else. A shoreline that has been destroyed by development cannot easily be reconstructed. An ancient hunting ground buried beneath a lake may be protected from modern construction. In a strange way, the water that destroyed the landscape may also have preserved it. The lake became a time capsule. And inside that time capsule are clues about how humans adapted to dramatic environmental change. That lesson is bigger than the mystery itself. The people who lived here experienced a world that was changing around them. The climate was shifting. Animals were moving. Water levels were changing. Habitats were transforming. Yet humans adapted. They changed where they traveled. They changed what they hunted. They developed new strategies. And they continued. Thousands of years later, we are standing on a completely different landscape. Cities now surround the lakes. Ships cross them. Millions of people live along their shores. But beneath the surface, another world remains. A world without highways, without skyscrapers, without borders. A world where a hunter could walk across ground that would eventually become the bottom of Lake Huron. And perhaps that is the most haunting part. The ancient city may not have been a city at all. There may have been no massive buildings, no monumental temples, no mysterious empire. Instead, there may have been something quieter. a network of camps, hunting grounds, trails, seasonal settlements, and communities moving through a landscape that vanished beneath rising water. We often imagine archaeology as the discovery of spectacular ruins, stone pyramids, buried temples, golden treasures. But sometimes the greatest discovery is simply realizing that the landscape itself has changed. The ground beneath us has not always been where it is today, and the Great Lakes prove it. What appears to be a permanent natural feature is actually the result of thousands of years of geological and climatic change. The lakes are not just bodies of water. They are archives, and parts of the archive are still unread. So could there really be an ancient city hidden beneath America's Great Lakes? If by city we mean a massive lost civilization with monumental architecture, there is no credible evidence for that. But if we mean a prehistoric human landscape, then the answer is far more intriguing. Yes, parts of that world are already known to exist, and researchers have only begun to understand what they contain. The discovery beneath Lake Huron showed that ancient people were capable of organizing their environment in sophisticated ways. They understood animal behavior. They used the landscape strategically. They constructed features that could survive thousands of years. And they did all of this in a world that modern humans can barely imagine. But what happened to everything else? What lies beneath the sediment? What ancient trails disappeared under rising water? What camps were abandoned before the lake covered them? And somewhere beneath the dark waters of the Great Lakes, could another discovery be waiting? Maybe the next sonar scan will reveal nothing. Maybe the strange shape will turn out to be natural rock. Or maybe researchers will find another piece of the lost landscape. Another structure. Another tool. Another clue. And if that happens, we may finally understand just how much of prehistoric North America disappeared beneath the water. For now, the Great Lakes remain both a natural wonder and an archaeological mystery. Their waters cover a landscape where humans once walked, and every wave that reaches the shore is moving over a world that once belonged to someone else. So the next time you look across Lake Huron, Lake Michigan, Lake Superior, Lake Erie, or Lake Ontario, remember this: you may be looking at the surface of a lake, but beneath that surface is another North America. One that existed thousands of years ago, one that disappeared slowly, and one that may still have stories left to tell. The question is not whether the lost world is there. We already know part of it is. The real question is, how much remains hidden,